our best to make sure that you have selected the right roundtable, but I'm quite sure that we will have an interesting discussion. Yeah, you see sitting next to me Lisa Daoud from Solidarité Internationale, Nathalie Lauriac from Terre des Hommes, and Lars Nissen from ACAPS. And well, we will introduce ourselves later on somewhat more. I would like to start with a presentation myself that gives a little bit the big picture, let's say, before we then move into the other presentations. Please feel free to interact if you have any questions. After each presentation we will have some time for questions, and also at the end, of course. The objective of our roundtable, I try to capture the objective in this picture, let's say. Now humanitarian actors, or NGOs, they're operating in what I call the old information environment. And you see there also a picture of, in India, of people doing a community risk assessment with let's say, paper-based. And we are already, and we're moving further into the new information environment. So on the right, you can see me. I asked people in Bangladesh in a local village to show their mobile or their smartphone, and well, you can see how many people put up their smartphone. So it's going fast. I will tell some more about what that new information environment is. So the question that we wanted to discuss with you today is, what does this new information environment mean for an NGO? And yesterday, during the history flashback, let's say, we also understood already that a lot of NGOs, they are now, for example, they are constructing or creating a new IM or GIS department, like MSF did, and they're working.
Do some exchange the good micro.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
It's working, but something.
Yeah. I guess we don't need a mic here. So, like, the example of MSF, they have created a new GIS department. They are working with CartONG. You can see it on the right as a new partner. Oh.
That's so.
Allô.
On entend dans notre salle.
Ah, c'est
ça.
You can't steal it.
So, I guess I was trying to say that NGOs are reacting to this new environment. So some of them are creating a new department. They are working with external partners like CartONG, for example. But that's just one way you could, as an NGO, let's say, deal with this new information environment. So we will discuss other ways that you could do it. And we have the perspective of two NGOs. And we have also, let's say, a kind of external partner for the humanitarian sector in ACAPS. Before I start describing, let's say, the new information environment, I would also like to coin some kind of common vocabulary, some terms around information management. We will be mostly talking about how to get data in the field, how to do assessments, but in the end it's also about turning that data into information, and information that meets the information needs of the people that have to take decisions. So there has to be a match between the information needs and the information products. And in the end, that has to lead to a kind of a sense-making, that people really understand the information. Yeah. So that you can make proper decisions. And this is actually a very complex process. And Sandra Sitov from CartONG explained yesterday already what this means in terms of what an information manager should do. It is quite a lot. But it's good to keep this kind of flow in mind if we talk about the use of data for the NGOs. So it's not only about the data, it's also about the other steps that come after it. So the new information environment. And here I would like to use actually what the private sector is often using. So I don't know if any one of you heard of the term SMAC, S-M-A-C. Guess not. So it's a kind of it's an acronym that the private sector uses to say that you have the social environment that is really changing. You have mobile social media, of course, social networks. You have collaborative tools like Skype. There are all kinds of ways to now socially connect through digital tools. So that's one part. But the other part is the mobility part. And that's not only about, let's say, geo-targeting people or that you have geolocations if you make use of certain services. It also refers to mobility across platforms. So that you can have your laptop, your smartphone, your tablet. It's across devices nowadays. And then it also leads to analytics. So you're generating a lot of data if you use all those digital tools. So every one of us knows that companies like Google and Facebook, they are using that data because they're using their services for free, so they have to have something in return. So they do a lot of analytics on your data. And also in terms of what's called search engine marketing, search engine optimization, that's all done in this analytics part. And then you still have the cloud part, which is of course that you can make solutions, IT solutions more agile. You can move them to the cloud, and we see it also if we're using Dropbox or Google Drive devices or solutions like that. Some people also add the IT part after SMAC, so SMAC it, and that refers then to the Internet of Things. That's another thing that will come. So this SMAC, let's say, that creates big data. Yeah, you can see on the picture, you can really get lost in the big data haystack. So it's quite difficult to deal with this big data. So if you break it down a little bit, like what is meant with big data, it consists actually of several categories. You have user-generated data like email or messaging. Of course, you have social media, Facebook, Twitter. You have also data that is captured through internet searches or banner ads. And sometimes you can opt in, sometimes you can opt out, but not always. You have data in business systems like school records or transportation logs, transactional data, sensor data coming from satellites or mobile phones, biological data, public records. So there is a lot of data nowadays being generated. And for the humanitarian community, it's very interesting to look at combinations of these data sets. We heard yesterday Thomas Rocca speaking from the Agence Française de Développement. They are combining mobile phone data and satellite data to say something about floods forecasting and flood resilience. And I can also give you now a small example of how you can use satellite and Twitter data to do flood early detection. This is actually work that has been done, for example, in Nepal and Philippines. And it turned out that satellite data is very good to do flood early detection at a little bit larger scale, but Twitter data could be really used to do it at a more granular scale. But of course, you're very dependent on whether local communities use Twitter or not, and it's still far from being ready to be operationalized. But okay, this is so the new information environment. It's still, in a certain sense, far away, I think. So we have to make sure that we realize that the majority is still old data. So for example, for the floods in Pakistan, 75% of the data shared with the government of Pakistan was still paper-based. And I think now, 6 years later, that number will have improved, of course. Although this picture from data collection in Bangladesh, shows that in Bangladesh still a lot is paper-based. This picture shows the different administrative levels in Bangladesh. So the lowest level is called the ward level, and then you have the union level, Upazila, and it goes up to the national level. And after a disaster, the government has a so-called SOS form or D form, but it's basically that somebody at the union level, he calls to somebody at the ward level, which is like a really small village, and he asks him like, how many houses are affected, you think on average, or he asks him some certain numbers, he just writes it down, and then it goes to the Upazila level, and usually at the union or the Upazila level, it's put in an Excel file, but it's aggregated. If you end up with the data at the highest level, you no longer have the granular data. So you have a lot of granularity loss. So there is all data, but it has its drawbacks. So now, I come to the second main part of my presentation. That's then to discuss how to deal as an organization with this new information environment, how to transform yourself. There are lots of new players, and also within existing organizations there are new initiatives. The World Bank, they are using, for example, GeoNode, a geospatial platform worldwide in a lot of countries. You have OCHA, and we saw many examples presented by Andre Verity yesterday, with, of course, the Humanitarian Data Exchange. You have UN Global Pulse. They are working for the UN on analyzing big data. Some examples of what international organizations are doing. And actually in the Netherlands, now OCHA started a humanitarian data center. In terms of NGOs, that we will hear after my presentation, 2 examples. Also, for example, the Red Cross, they have now humanitarian data analytics teams, and they're doing a lot in this area as well. Of course, we have the digital volunteers. And actually, the digital volunteers, that also links to what I would call data NGOs. So there are NGOs that are using data, and they are no longer like NGOs working on the ground. So you have ACAPS, of course. You have Map Action, Humanitarian, Humanity Road, Netto Crisis Informatics. They're all dealing with data in a different way. So I think that will be explained later on as well. But the interesting part is also that they're working with volunteers, like CartONG is doing. And last, you have the social and private enterprises. And yesterday, Andre Verity said that sometimes the private sector might be 5 years ahead of the humanitarian sector. I'm not sure if it's in all cases like that, but like in terms of working with digital volunteers, the humanitarian sector might be ahead. But in terms of definitely dealing with data or collecting data, they are ahead, the private sector, I think. So that's why I would like to show one example of what the private sector is doing. That will be from First Mile Geo and Premise. So First Mile Geo is a startup from Washington, D.C. They say themselves that they are the Uber for data. So that means that they want actually to cut all the middle layers, let's say, around data collection. So in this slide you see on the right what the current industry is doing. And with current industry they are referring to like AC Nielsen or JFK. They are like big market research companies that do a lot of consumer research. And they are saying forget about all those middle layers like with corporate staff, analysts, linguists, managers. We don't need that middle layer. They are directly, virtually collecting enumerators. So, for example, in Syria, they want data on Syria. They collect people through their digital profiles. People send in their CV. People leave their traces on social media. So you can use all that to kind of get a feeling of if your enumerator could be a good one, let's say. They download an app on their mobile phone. They are directly paid for the data they collect. And later on, when you get the data, you use metadata to analyze the data they are collecting. So metadata can be, for example, the GPS data. If they are visiting several locations, you can check if they spent a reasonable amount of time or not, or whether it was just like, they're making up the data. So there are ways to check if the data they're collecting is valid. This shows this micro-tasking on demand process a little bit more, what I described. So they have a process of recruiting, screening, training, mostly online. And then you can define your sample and start tasking. And this might not be that visible, well, not visible at all, I think, but this picture shows Aleppo in Syria. And what they did was ask local enumerators to collect data on bread prices. And this was a proxy indicator for knowing if the area of Aleppo was occupied by the, let's say, the host nation, by the national government, in quotes, or by the, let's say, the more the opposing groups. Because if the bread price was stable, it was usually government controlled, and if it was fluctuating, it was the other part of the town. And their model of let's say making money is in the end to have data plans. So they are looking for organizations that need like 20,000 data sets on an almost continuous basis. And so they have that fleet of enumerators out there. They're collecting data on a daily basis, and that's how they try to make money, let's say. That's similar to what Premise is doing. This is a Silicon Valley-based company with a lot of venture capital. They are collecting data, as you can see on this picture, of like, for example, the prices of certain fruits or vegetables, really on a daily basis. So they're collecting enormous amounts of microdata. And then later on, they have big data scientists or data analysts who are combining this with other type of data sources. In the end, I think they really want to make money out of those data sets that they are creating. So this is an example of what the private sector is doing. So if you go back to your own organization, what would this mean for your digital strategy? Maybe it might actually be good to ask who is working for an NGO in the room? 2-3 persons, okay. And who is working for more like a research organization or consultancy? Okay. Because otherwise, it will be interesting later on to hear how you are dealing with this digital strategy, let's say. Because the digital strategy would be a strategy that is informed by the capabilities of these readily available digital technologies, and that you transform your organization accordingly and outsource where necessary, and that you make sure that in your organization there's a higher level of data literacy and that people are more tech savvy. And what's usually being done in the private sector is that they start with appointing a chief information officer for marketing, and one for operations, and one for the workplace, and one for security. So it's kind of a silo approach of transforming to the digital world. But actually it's clear now from also research from the MIT Center for Information Systems Research that this will not really work. It's more a divide and conquer approach instead of combine and conquer. So they have found in their research that what really works is an integrated digital strategy that consists of two main parts. One is that how you engage with the customer. So that would be in terms of NGO, how you engage with beneficiaries. There you can use those digital technologies. And the other part is really about your main work. So the solutions you are offering or the services you are providing to the beneficiaries, that you digitize that part. And you of course have a kind of operational backbone, your normal IT systems. But for those digital services, you need a digital services backbone. So that means that, for example, the Red Cross is developing different apps for that you cannot use your existing old slow IT backbone. So you need more flexible structures so that you can swap an app if it's no longer working. You can implement a new one. So it has to be very flexible. So that's actually my last slide to round up and to say how let's say the private sector is dealing with digital strategy. They are more and more moving towards an integrated digital strategy, where they integrate different functions in an organization, and they try to be more agile and instead of efficient, so that you can react to changes. And I think this might be also the way forward for NGOs. And actually, for example, NetHope, they are now in the US working with MIT on also developing digital strategies or digital transformation mechanisms for NGOs. So it will be interesting to see what comes out of that work. Okay, thanks. That's for my part. Any burning questions maybe already? Okay, then I propose we move on to Lisa Daoud. Let's see if I can.
I'm going to stand actually.
Yeah, sure. Okay. So just tell me when I need to.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So I would love to say that I'm going to present our digital strategy, though we don't have one. So it's going to be a lot less fancy than that. So I asked, when I was preparing this presentation, I asked myself, so what do you think the future? So I put data management because I couldn't really decide between assessment, evaluation, monitoring. Pretty much everything we do that relates to data, for me, it's data collection and management, is about to change. It's already changing, so that's the approach that I took. So for those of you who don't know Solidarité Internationale, we're a medium-sized NGO. So our budget is something like 60, 70 million a year. So we're considered small in the business. We provide mainly so water, hygiene, sanitation, and food security assistance in about 15 countries at the moment. I'm myself based in Paris. I'm meal advisor. Who knows what meal stands for? You can. So monitoring, evaluation, accountability, and learning. All of these in this little person. So I work in the technical department in Solidarité HQ. So I'm basically one of these layers that Marc was mentioning. I'm the middleman between the tech worlds and the program managers and coordinator in the field. You can go next.
Sure.
So that's our model right now. So most of our data management is done in-house. We have a culture, a tradition of doing everything ourselves. So a bit like I was saying yesterday at the anniversary of CartONG, when you talk to CartONG, you actually talk to the person that is building your database. If you speak with us, you're actually going to be speaking with the person that is managing the project or coordinating the project. Because we don't have a lot of resources, most of us are actually doing things. And we like to keep control over what we do. You can.
Yeah, all of them?
Yeah, it's going to be easier, right? So, so most of the things are done in-house. Our capacity development is going through something called the meal approach. So basically trying to improve our accountability to affected population, for those of you who are familiar with this concept. And through this, we try to use, to have better surveys, to have better project implementation through using better digital solutions. We have several experiences of in-house tool development. So for example, we developed our intranet. Edmond Bar, who is now working with Terre des Hommes, used to be sort of my predecessor. He developed our intranet himself, in his free time almost. So that's one of the examples. In Lebanon, just like many organizations, we're dealing with a lot of data on refugee sites or people and families. So we had to create an online database linked to a platform to make sure we were actually having a global overview over one refugee site, for example. Like you operate in one refugee site, but you provide wash, food security, I don't know, cash assistance or whatsoever. But what you want is to keep the global picture over the site. So we actually had to move away from Excel, which was really traumatizing for us. But we did it, and we have kind of a system. But so when I was the one supervising the project, and I had to choose between outsourcing everything or doing it in-house, and I chose to hire a developer in Tripoli, in northern Lebanon, and to build it ourselves, which was challenging. It took us a year. So yeah, we have a culture of frontliners, basically. That's what we say. So we're really cautious about this whole outsourcing thing in pretty much everything that we do, project implementation or monitoring evaluation. But we do have outsourcing experiences. So I was trying to summarize the most recent ones. I'm sure I forgot some. But so, for example, in tool design and development, we worked with CartONG in Mali and Central African Republic to build a database. So, for example, in CAR, we launched a program. Our teams were super excited. It was a food security and wash integrated program. We had 200,000 beneficiaries, and we started doing all of this on Excel ourselves. And then we realized that we had double counting, and it wasn't going to work. So we started using ODK to collect data, but we still had issues, so we had to ask CartONG to support us to have a system that would actually avoid double counting and this kind of things. We also require external resources to build our capacities. So for example, for using mobile data collection, MDC, an analysis tool, for example, in Central African Republic as well, we also worked with CartONG to make sure that we were training all our teams, so both all enumerators, project managers, coordinators, etc., so that they could use the tools. And also a very interesting thing that we see more and more is the complete outsourcing of monitoring surveys. I didn't put evaluation in here because for me, I mean, when you think about evaluation, mostly you think of external evaluation, so that's normal. It's always been the case. I mean, at least since the Rwanda genocide in the 90s. But monitoring used to be a very internal concept. And what I'm seeing now is that, for example, in Afghanistan and Kenya and Mali, we actually have consulting companies running the baseline and the inline survey. So that's actually the data that your project team is going to use. It's not about reflecting on strategy or approaches. It's actually about measuring your output, outcomes, and impacts. So that's pretty new for us. And so the reason why, you can go next. Yep. The reason why we're outsourcing some of our work is because we have some gaps, and we were seeing some opportunities. So we don't have an IM culture in Solidarité Internationale. So we need, and for example, Humanitarian organization to help us build that IM culture. We cannot do it on our own. We also lacking skills and know-how. For example, we're really bad at GIS now. Basically, if you go to Solidarité mission and the coordinator is a big fan of GIS, you'll get a map. If he's not, you won't. So it's people related. It's pretty bad. And we also need data analysis skills sometimes. Like for example, when we have cash distribution programs that require, I don't know, fancy sampling to actually have an experimental design for impact evaluation, or just to measure the impact of your cash distribution. Actually, we would work with a research institution that we worked with the AUB in Beirut, American University of Beirut of Lebanon. And we also don't have time to invest in innovation. So I don't know if some organizations are going to relate to this, but the scenario right now is basically I myself, Lisa, I'm attending this super cool conference, and I go back home and I have a lot of ideas, and then I have to transform that into an actual piloting, and that's very, very complicated for us, because I need a mission to actually pick up on my idea, and then pilot it, and build our knowledge on it. And that happens sometimes, but most of the time it doesn't. And also I won't have time myself to actually follow up on the tool. So I leave this room with a lot of ideas, but then I don't know if maybe, I don't know, this tool actually didn't work, or this tool actually got super famous because it had this amazing functionality, etc. And I don't have the capacity to do that myself. So that's pretty much it, and I wanted to just finish up on what risks I see, and I'm pretty conservative about outsourcing, so I don't know if I'm really the best person to talk in this roundtable, but I guess it's a valuable point of view. So when you tell me outsource something, I first see the risks, honestly, and then I see the opportunity. But so basically the first one would be segregating data and meaning. So for example, this goes a little bit with lack of data ownership. When I was in Afghanistan 2 months ago, and I wrapped up a project, and it's a long project. Most of Solidarité projects are pretty short, but this one is a 3-year project funded by Agence Française de Développement, about agriculture and rural development. And so I was like, okay, can you show me your monitoring data? And they're like, oh no, but it's this consultant that did the baseline, etc. So I'm like, yeah, it was 2 years ago, and I'm like, okay, so let's see it. Where's the data set, and what are your indicators? And they're like, but it was too long. The report was literally 157 pages, and so I went through it. It took me like I think a day and a night. And they had built composite indicators about measuring poverty and vulnerability. It was super cool, right? It was like really, really advanced. But none of the program staff remembered it. Literally none of them. So of course the program manager had changed 3 times at the beginning of the project. But even if we had the same one, the local team had not read the reports, and they didn't have any presentation, restitution of the reports. So there was no data ownership. So the report was, for me, completely useless, or only useful for the donor, for AFD. So one way to go around this, or 2 ways to go around it. So for me, it would be to have people like me. I'm selling my own position. I like doing this, because people don't really understand what we do. So basically having people who speak the same language. So you don't have program manager talking with the consultant or the survey manager in the consulting company. You have someone in between that actually understands what survey protocol is, basically, and that understands the program. That can actually make the link between the data and what you're actually trying to do with the data, which is supporting the operations. For me, there's no other purpose. And also having presentations, so making sure that everything that you're doing, but I know many people have been repeating this in this conference, but everything has to be at the service of the program. And in Solidarité, we reshaped our work, organigram lately, charts, to have the operation departments in the middle of everything. So you actually have the operation team and then logistics, technical departments. Everyone is around it. It used to be very linear. But it's really important because I think we get trapped in our own agenda and our own strategy. So sometimes we forget that the survey that we're running is actually for the program, and that's the only thing that matters. And then the last risk that I see is the increase in costs. So it can actually look very expensive if I ask you to budget, for example, a consultant for a monitoring survey. On your budget, it's going to look like a lot of money. I'm not going to tell you how much it costs in Afghanistan, because that was outrageous. But let's say you're budgeting 50,000 euros. in a budget of 1 million. It's going to really seem like a lot of money for the person that is putting the budget together. But actually, if it's done in a good way, it's actually good value for money. Like if the data collected is at the service of the program, hopefully you won't be doing damage control that much because you can make informed decisions because you have good data quality and good data visualization tools that are at the service of your decision-making process. Yeah, and I think that was it. Thank you.
Time for a few questions, maybe? No?
That was super clear.
Yeah.
Just in terms of how you structure the engagement with the team, do you do trainings for your operations teams and operations staff on how they can manage and use the data after they've received it? And if so, can you speak a little about what you found to be effective in sort of improving that kind of sense?
So people are first trained when they join Solidarité. We have a 2 weeks induction program, and most of these 2 weeks, it's interesting. It is on data management because it's on monitoring evaluation. So you get that when you first start, and then you forget everything. And so I do a lot of on-site training because I still not believe truly in e-learning for this topic. So myself, or I work with CartONG on this, and so it would be like a week training on survey implementation, for example. But still, it's very complicated because people would listen to you for a week and then jump back to their project management priorities right away. One of the things that I found useful is mobile data collection, because you actually use the tool as a fancy thing to get their attention. And then it's actually changing something in the way they're going to do surveys. And also, you raise their awareness about data validation and skip patterns and all the things that you want them to use. And doing this, you kind of like put some of the good practices, like anticipating on analysis. It's a lot easier for me to integrate that into a mobile data collection training than just go and be like, okay, I'm going to train you guys on data analysis, and these are the good messages and the good practices, and that's it. So that's one of the good things. And then have meal people on the field. Yeah. Not all of our missions have meal dedicated staff, but I find it very useful because they're the one that can train regularly, and I can get out tools also that are useful for using the data.
Thanks. Yes, okay, go ahead.
You spoke a bit about measuring the inputs and the outcomes to assess the impact of the program. Can you speak a bit on what sort of tools you've used and your experience with that?
Do we have an hour? No, okay, super
well, we have
quick.
still 2 speakers coming
Yeah,
in,
so super quickly, for outcome management, we do surveys, nothing more than IRC is doing. For impacts, the fanciest thing that we did was for a cash distribution program in Lebanon, where we actually did a control group, treatment group. So through, I don't remember the name of this advanced sampling method that we used. And then we did quite a lot of qualitative surveys. Really nothing more than you guys are doing. Nothing more fancier.
Okay, yeah, first, you still have a question, or?
Yeah, it's okay, you can... my question is that you have pilots, starting, to work with external partners, or consultant firms to manage the baseline lines. I don't know if you, this is a strategy, you will continue to do this, indicate a big part of the money and the budget
I'm going to be very cautious, and I was seeing you doing this when I was saying I'm pretty skeptical about it. So every time a mission will come to me saying, okay, we just want to launch this bid, this call for offer, blah, 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 I'm going to say, okay, are you sure you can't do it yourself? And can you explain me why you want to outsource it? So it will be an exception. I haven't seen any very success story in this so far.
Tim, had a question?
So, maybe it's a completely wrong question because I don't know enough about what you do. But one thing I'm wondering is, do you you have lots of different programs or things you do, and you measure how, situation before and afterwards. Do you use that to try and figure out what things work? So the next time somebody suggests a new crazy idea they had at a conference, then you can go back and look at the things you've done in the past and maybe find something similar and go, yeah, actually this, we have the data that we've measured that this works, or maybe you just say we've never measured whether this works or not, so let's do this. Is there a kind of a culture like this, going back, looking what worked, what didn't work?
In terms of solutions, right?
Yeah.
I think we're creating the culture now, but it wasn't like this. And if you go to our HQ now, you cannot physically have a record of every solutions that we used and why they worked and why they didn't. Like that doesn't exist, because some of them would be led by HQ, some would be mission, some would be, I don't know, logs, communication, etc. And we have pretty high turnover, so you lose institutional memory quite fast. So we're doing this, like right now we're actually in the process of referencing every single solutions that we're using to see how we can be smarter. But it's definitely a challenge. It's not easy.
With that, I would then like to move on to Nathalie Lauriac, Head of Quality and Monitoring, if I remember correctly. No,
Accountability.
Quality and Accountability at Terre des Hommes.
Yes, I am the Head of Quality and Accountability Unit. I guess that it's a bit strange and vague and abstract. More or less, we are working on project cycle management, situation analysis, planification, design of strategy, monitoring, evaluation, but also capitalization, learning, and accountability. So how to do all this, informing, communicating with people, opening participation, and even partnership with people, their representatives, and the actors. More or less it's this. And in this big picture, we're working also with information management, information and communication technologies. So we are only three. It's quite recent. I was alone during 3 years, so I'm quite happy. And there is one person working on information management for the unit and in support. And the unit, of course, is in support for all the organization. The organization, so we are quite a small NGO, but we are the most important child relief agency in Switzerland. We are in Switzerland, the headquarters is in Lausanne. What else? An important thing to say, I was working in the international cooperation field 20 years ago as a country representatives. And then I stopped and I continued to work on poverty and inequalities question. But in France, within territorial approaches program during 15 years as consultant. And then I went back to my first field of work, and but only 3 years ago as head of this unit. So I still have, I think, external point of view. So forgive me if something are not really precise, or if I didn't take into account some key elements of the sector. Well, take just perhaps the interest to have more distanciated. I have quite a broken English, so forgive me and stop me if I'm not clear. Well, that's it. We'll see. In fact, I start with a very big question, quite large, to explain what is the positioning of Terre des Hommes today on this question. So the question we had to answer was future assessment for the humanitarian sector, who are the providers, and what can be and should be outsourced. I think we have positioning quite similar with Solidarité. And for us, this question is not a question of detail, it's not a technical question, and it's a real political question. And need assessment objective is really to understand and finally to interpret reality, to design strategies of intervention, relevant and effective. It's not a small goal, it's a big one. And it's a question of power. The power of ICT, which is now a new process, very powerful of knowledge production, definitely linked with decision makers and with governance. It's a question of power of the humanitarian system, because the need assessment are a basis for prioritization, funds allocation, and for leading the coordination. So it's quite a big question. It's also a question of the power of NGOs, because it's a basis for fundings and a basis for its intervention in foreign countries. It's the power of providers, who never know what's next, what's behind. It's a difficult question also. It's a real power. It's also a question for concerning the power of national and local actors and authorities in the country of intervention, because it's questioned their role within the response. The way the need assessment will be carried on, yes, will define their role. And it's also, of course, the question concerning the power of the people affected by the crisis of poverty situation. We're working really in long-term development context and humanitarian context. So it determines their role within the response, their power to voice their needs, demands, rights, and also to protect and to defend their dignity. So it's quite a difficult question to answer. But because of this aspect of political question, it is the first lay that we have to really think about outsourcing or the approach or the assessment. And why it is not a neutral and technical operation? I had a first answer concerning the political dimension, but another thing is really to think about the concrete things we are working when we are doing need assessment. And I can be provocative, it's a bit rude, I think, in the sector, but we have to remind that a need, a demand, do not exist in itself. And it's always, a lot of things will influence really the dimension of the need and its content. Of course, the way humanitarians understand the situation and the solution they already have, and they don't have many, will influence their choice of data, the methods to collect the data. It will influence data processing, the question they will ask to the people, the analysis grid. So, well, needs will be finally the final result of this process. Of course, also the demand expressed by people and national actors will be also influenced by their own understanding of humanitarian aid, the relationship they have with interviewers, the solution they think feasible, possible. So all this will influence what they say, how they answer to the question. So we can say, well, so it's not possible. It's impossible to make an assessment with all this. All this can be almost contained with a clear positioning, ethics, quality standards, including for the use of ICT, methodology, skills, time to listen, of course, accountability on who we are and what we intend to do, what we can do, and debates discussing the information. And it's the only way to really work on this, all those factors who influence the definition of needs and demands. What has to be done by or with NGO? Sorry, I finished tonight, so I can't remember. Well, first of all, I have. Well, it was a bit stretched. Needs assessment should be also an assessment of resources, capacities, assets. So in Terre des Hommes, we don't speak about needs assessment, we speak about situation analysis. And why? Because of this, and because situation analysis, and also we have, sorry, I remember the logical of my... situation analysis aims to better understand the problem, of course, but also to identify possible solutions, levels for potential action. So it prepares action. It's very... We are in the project already. And also it contributes to create the conditions for the positive conditions, the conditions required for the implementation. Good way of communication, common understanding of the problem and of the situation. And some of the small prerequisite for trust. So all this, finally, the objective of the assessment rely and question the identity of the NGO, its mission. So it's difficult. It's impossible in this way, on this aspect also, to really outsource the assessment. It's linked to action. So what has to be defined? Of course, we are not able, like Solidarité, to do everything on our own. We need some specialized skills. We need some. So, but if on the basis of all this, what has to be defined and mastered by the NGO? For me, NGO should define the objective of the situation analysis. And we have to lead the approach. We have to define the information requirements. We have also to define the necessary data. Well, big idea of this. And the way data will be collected, because it's a big issue. The way it will be processed, the big framework. The way information will be displayed, disseminated, discussed, and then analyzed. We have also to plan that information requirements can be redefined in the agile process. And it's quite always needed, in fact, because we discover new dimension of the problem or new capacities, new potentialities for action. So we have to go deeper, or we have to see other things. We have also to define the decision-making process. And I try to explain this, but of course need assessment is really linked with the decision making. So I think that this has really to be mastered by the NGO. So I think I didn't have time to explain that, yes, we need some help. We need some... we need to outsource some key things. The operational staff in the field are not always able to, and very often they are not able to really carry on a situation analysis. So sometimes we have to outsource. Sometimes people can come from the headquarters and help, but sometimes it's not possible. So we have to outsource this. We have to outsource also sometimes information management, the training on the ICTs, etc. So we can partially outsource need assessment or situation analysis, but only partially, and for our understanding, only to one type of organization. What are the requirements? And I think things have to be improved on this. I don't think that things are really ready now, but I think it can be a perspective to have an ethical framework for all professionals involved in situation analysis studies, including those who involved in information management and ICT. A clear policy and guidance to frame the studies to be sure that really they serve this objective, and to frame also information management and the use of ICT. Clear guidelines on this specific topic to enshrine information management in clear methodological process with clear roles and responsibilities. And of course we need, because well, I was alone in Terre, now we are 3, but for big files, so we are not very good. We try to organize regional training for national staff, sometimes also for partners. But for sure, we need to improve this and to develop capacity building for NGO staff. And I think Terre des Hommes is not the only one. But need to reinforce those capacities, to enable NGOs to lead the process, because now it's not always easy for the staff to really lead the process. We have to reinforce their capacities on methodology, on information management, on ICT. We're working also with CartONG on this, and it's really the objective. And okay, partially outsourced, but to whom? Partially outsourced because it has always to be done in close collaboration with NGO and with their representatives on global level, but I didn't really deal with this issue. And of course, for me, it will be important to be able to outsource, to delegate this work, part of this work, to an organization respecting the humanitarian principles and quality standards. We try to build something on the core humanitarian standards in Terre des Hommes. And for this, I think that the role of a humanitarian to humanitarian organization is very important, and we need this type of organization to grow, yes. I think that's all, yes.
Thanks, Nathalie, for offering, let's say, also a different partly political perspective on the question. So I think we have had already quite some different perspectives right now, more the innovation, the technology perspective, and also the organizational perspective. But let me first check if there are some questions. Right now? No? Then I would like to give the floor to Lars Nissen, the founder and project director of ACAPS. I think in a few years you will also be able to organize a 10-year anniversary, so
yeah,
that could be interesting as well.
Yeah, we're 6 years old now, so I usually say that we used to be a cute little baby, and now we're the pimply teenager that nobody wants to touch, and we're still struggling to become a productive member of society. So that's where we are sort of organizationally. We're about 25 staff, budget of close to $3 million a year, and we're based in Geneva. How many of you know about us? Are we? Yeah. Ish, yeah. Okay. I'd like to start by, I think the biggest challenge we have as a community is to move towards a more network-centric approach to our work. I think a lot of what we're talking about is essentially about that. And I was in Istanbul for the World Humanitarian Summit, and the biggest frustration, there were many, but the biggest frustration I had with that event was that that's a discussion that wasn't tabled. It was by and large a discussion between, within the ISC echo chamber, if you want. Right? So the traditional players discussing how to cut the cake. And I think that some of the challenges we're faced with are simply so big that we can't manage with the setup we have right now. Before I sort of jump into it, a couple of markers to just let you know where I'm coming from. One, when I talk about assessment, it's along the line of what you're saying. It's on the sense-making side of things. It's understanding the problem we're trying to deal with, whereas your presentation I saw as being more, how do we then, once we had decided what to do, how do we solve the problem? So sense-making versus solving, making the diagnosis versus giving a treatment. Right? Those two spaces are different for me, and ACAPS work exclusively on the sense-making side of that divide. I think there are some parallels, and it's really interesting to hear your perspectives on the other side, but what I say now, some of it only relates to the sense-making. I think there is a fundamental difference. Secondly, when I say assessment, it's not data collection. It's a much broader sense-making process that I refer to. So you want the good news or the bad news first? The bad news? Okay. There are no indications that evidence play a major role in how we actually make decisions in the humanitarian sector. Whenever somebody has done a study of decision making, I remember one report saying the international humanitarian community construct and solve crises without taking much evidence into account. Right. Another report that we did a couple of years ago with Tufts University essentially found that we do more or less what we did last time. We tweak it a little bit, but there's a higher level of path dependency if you want. So that's the bad news on one side. We don't seem to really use evidence much in how we decide what we do. It's much more politics and our mandates and whatever that determine what we do. That's troubling. Especially, it was a very thoughtful presentation you had with the political nature of this. It cuts to this is not about sampling frames. This is about the humanitarian principles. This is our heartblood, and it should concern every single humanitarian that we apparently don't really look at the situation in the field when we make decisions about what to do. How can you be needs-based if you don't understand the needs? So those are pretty bad news. The other piece of bad news is I broke my phone this morning. Right? And it really served as a reminder. First of all, don't take your phone with you when you shower. It's a very dumb idea. But it's really, I couldn't get my ticket for this conference. I couldn't do anything. Just a reminder of the vulnerability that we create, the more advanced technology we use when you're in the field. You don't want a broken phone, and you don't want to rely on systems that crack, right? Good news. I think we really are moving forward. I think over the 5-6 years that I've been focusing on this, we have made some real progress. And I think we are headed towards some kind of soft disruption, if you want, which will enable us to do a better job. But it is important to remember the bad news, that actually we don't really take evidence into account when we make the big decisions. I'll give you a couple of examples later on. That was sort of the intro. So, what to say? If we look at the question of outsourcing, one of the things we pushed from ACAPS has been H2H. You had a discussion here on Monday about that. And that's a concept that I like because it somehow addresses some of the concerns that the two of you raise. Right? Because can we really outsource? On one side, of course, we can't let go of our heartblood. I think it's the responsibility of every single humanitarian actor to interpret a situation according to the humanitarian principles and decide how their mandate apply in that situation and then design their actions on the basis of that. So of course you can't outsource this. We're not little Lego blocks. Right? We're humanitarians, and our diversity and our differences are really one of our key strengths, because we have those principles for a reason, and that is that it helps us in very murky waters discuss how best to position ourselves. And if we all stand in the same place, we probably have a problem. There's a need for people to sit in Damascus. There's definitely also a need for some people to be in Turkey. And maybe those two positions can be mutually exclusive. But our diversity and our independent positioning is something I really value, and I think we have to be extremely careful in terms of, we talk a lot about coordination, and we're all frustrated that we don't coordinate well enough. But we have to be careful that we don't coordinate the truth too hard, that we don't try to subject the sense-making process to the same sort of logic that we use when we coordinate. Right? It's actually a good idea to have redundant analytical capacity, in other words. Right? It may be a good idea to have light shown on a problem from different perspectives in order to ensure that you get a robust humanitarian narrative. That's the way I would put more or less what you said, that we need a robust humanitarian narrative. And we can't have that without having a lot of people thinking about it. And it concerns me a bit when I see, for example, the Grand Bargain. I don't know how much you follow that interesting discussion, but you know, the main effort of the donors and the main agencies to improve our sector, talking about the need to really have one version of one coordinated assessment on the table of the HCT when we make decisions, that's really dangerous. That's really dangerous. I mean, if you look at Haiti right now, clearly you have a government who's much more assertive than they were previously in terms of what information is being released and getting out. And I think that's really dangerous if there isn't somebody who can also say, hey, actually, we think this is important as well. And then it's that shared situation awareness which emerges across a network of humanitarian actors, which will enable us to have a robust humanitarian narrative which ensures that we don't make the big mistakes. Right, so I'm obviously not talking about the program level assessment, which is more the space you were in. I'm talking about the strategic level, the shared situation awareness. I think that's where we often have a problem. We wrote a report when, to give you an example, we wrote a report when Libya and Gaddafi fell and all of that. And for some reason that ended up on the table of the US military European Command who were doing the planning. And I went up and spoke to them afterwards to understand how they had used our report. Now, did we write that report for the US military? No, we didn't. Do I have strong opinions about how the military should be involved in humanitarian operations? Yes, very much so. Right? But do I think it's a good thing that they had that report on the table when they were planning? Yeah, I think that's a very good thing. I think, in a sense, you know, that report can serve as a Trojan horse for the humanitarian principles, because obviously we have a humanitarian lens that we put over a given problem, and so that thinking, that gets into their heads, that's not a bad thing in my book. That's actually a good thing. I'm very happy to discuss that, by the way. And so I think, again, shared situation awareness, a network-centric way of working, creating a common understanding, not in details, but on the broad lines of what is the problem we deal with here, both within humanitarians and for humanitarians, and for non-humanitarians. Right? You get the point? So what do I think the solution is? First, I think this is going to be increasingly important. If you look just at the issues around urban response and cash, you will see that those take a breaking ball to our current humanitarian architecture. Right? It just doesn't make sense to do sector-based coordination if you give people cash, and obviously in an urban setting, area-based coordination is much better. So what do? We have a cluster system. Right? Everything we do is organized around that. That probably needs to change somehow, at least on the assessment side of things. Right? So what do? I think we have a big architecture discussion around us. So I think it's also becomes more important because of if I think about the European migration refugee crisis we have had, and Ebola, right? Those two almost make an earthquake look linear, if you know what I mean. The dynamism and the feedback mechanisms you have, where posting on Facebook can make people in the pipeline change their behavior. Right? Ebola, did we really know what was the story of Ebola? Right? How did we find that narrative? I'll tell you how I saw it being defined from Geneva. Step one was, this is not a humanitarian problem. We've seen it before in Uganda, we've seen it in DRC. It's very tragic. But it'll essentially be a couple of villages that are wiped out. And then the virus burns itself out and it's done. Don't talk too much about it, it'll detract from Syria. That was step one. Step two was, what is MSF actually saying? And if Ebola gets into an urban environment, what actually happened? And while we were still thinking about that, then somebody got on a plane and puked on somebody else and made that person sick on the way to the States. And then it was Dustin Hoffman in a spacesuit. Then it became an American horror movie, and you saw the graph from CDC, and we all know the response that followed. Think about that. Think about the resources committed and the analysis behind it. The bottom line is we have too few people in the sector who actually have time to think. We don't have ring-fenced analytical capacity. Think about how much time you have spent discussing how to collect data with new smart gizmos in this conference, and how much you spent making sense out of it. How many people do you have in your organizations involved in response, collection, cleaning of data? How many do you have that actually sit down and think about what does this data mean for us as an organization, and what decisions should we make, back to decision making, and the disconnect between our humanitarian narrative and evidence, right? That for me is the real bottleneck. So for me the future and the way forward is an ecosystem, right? An ecosystem of sense makers, if you want. Ecosystem, I think, is a good metaphor for 3 reasons. 1, it's diverse. If you ever heard of elephants, that's not an ecosystem. You need different kinds of animals in the ecosystem, right? That's where the H2H discussion comes in. H2H is fundamentally different. You said something like we are an external partner, right? And that's often how we are seen as ACAPS. People ask me, is it a company? What is it? No, we are not. We're an NGO project, but we don't deliver blankets and stuff in the field, right? We deliver data and thinking. And so our positioning as a humanitarian service provider, therefore humanitarian to humanitarian, just like business to business, I think quite accurately pinpoints the positioning we have in the system, and that gives us different capacities, it gives us different interests, and different buttons we can push. Like, we're good at some things, we're really bad at other things. So are big, large bureaucracies in the humanitarian sector. They're really good at some things and really, really bad at other things, right? So we need diversity. That's the first reason for an ecosystem. Secondly, it's connected. You know, you have a food chain, you have symbiotic and parasitic relationships in an ecosystem, so we rely on each other, so we need to connect. And thirdly, it evolves, it changes over time, and if there's something we need to, it is definitely to change as a sector. Right? So that's why I like talking about an ecosystem. The key then for sense making and assessment is the 3 C's. We need connected, contrasting, and complementary perspectives from a network of sense makers to ensure that we get a robust humanitarian narrative. Connected, contrasting, and complementary. Yeah? So for me, that connected is quite easy. The difference between complementary and contrasting is the difference between having light from different angles and having different glasses on, having a different lens that you look at a problem. Okay? I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lars Peter, for lifting us also to the higher strategical level and giving us these insights. So I'm quite sure that this will have led to some questions in your mind. So I would like to open up the floor now. It's 12:15. So I think we have still 15 minutes, if I'm right, for further discussion. Yeah, so I think Lars Peter also gave many pointers or points that we could discuss further on. So I'm really looking forward to some questions. But yeah.
Can I just make a comment maybe? I mean, Lars Peter, as usual, you're super spot on. I think you've just been actually saying the things that we have been thinking of, but you actually have just a knack in really putting it into good keywords or good buzzwords, really. Same as with the H2H system. I think one thing I'd like to say, which kind of goes along in lines also what Lisa and Nathalie have been saying, when we are asked if we actually do assessments, we say yes, but, because it really, I see it also as a partial outsourcing, because whilst we can help to set it up from a technical level, we can't help you with the content. We can't help you to solve these questions from a political level. Which questions do I really need to have in there? How do I communicate? That's something that we can't help, and we actually don't want to, because we can only fail. You are the people on the ground. You know the situation a lot better, and it even goes to the thing that yes, we can help you analyze the data, but not at the same level as ACAPS has, because we don't have these thinkers that actually do have the time to really do a full situational awareness. We can really only help if you know which indicators you want and you have been collecting them, and then we can, yes, help you make nice graphs of it or make a nice dashboard or, help you to get the key out. So I think the NGOs really need to be in the driving seat for this and kind of really clearly decide which aspects they feel like that they could be outsourcing, because there's people out there that can help them to do that part better, but really the content and everything. So I have a conservative approach to that as well, even though I'm exchange. That's basically what I wanted to bring across.
And maybe I'll start with a question for myself, for Lars Peter. You mentioned that one of your reports ended up, let's say, on the desk of the US military. So how do you go about, let's say, once ACAPS produces a very insightful report, what is actually then the next step that you take as an organization to make sure that the reports are being used in the political hemisphere, let's say, that you have a strategy in place to make sure that the reports are being used? How do you go about that part?
We're very careful not overstretching, right? I think we can analyze a market and say whether this is a crisis of access or availability, but we're not going to say whether vouchers or response modalities which one should be used. That's not our job. We're there to try to shape the playing field. We don't really care who scores the goal. So, right, we put our stuff out there in public. We want to have as many people as possible read it. We try to study how they use it, but we don't do advocacy. We stay quite consciously away from that, because we don't want to be that sort of sucks us into the wrong role around the decision-making table. Right?
Okay.
A good assessment doesn't eliminate the need to make a decision. You still have to make a choice between different options. Our job is decision-making support.
And because at this morning during the speed geeking session, Nick McWilliam from Map Action mentioned that he's now studying on behalf of Map Action how the information products from Map Action are being used. And if it's like about giving someone a map so that he can go from A to B, it's of course easy to measure. But actually, it becomes quite quickly also for the maps from Map Action a difficult question to determine how their information products are really used in the, let's say, humanitarian response process. So how are you trying to study this?
So we look at marketing and consumer insights essentially as the field to do this. A lot of it is anecdotal. I took your report and put it on the table of the minister so he could get some concrete information. I think if you really want attribution, for me, some of the work we did early on in Syria is where I think we actually managed to really influence something. The first assessment, the JNA assessment, which was in opposition-held territory, I think helped shift the narrative away from a very Damascus-centric view to a much more balanced view. That's the example we always use. But otherwise, we do in-depth interviews with some of our users. We do some survey monkeys, but really, we haven't gotten much further than some very basic insights, to be honest.
Question?
Tom Kosolis, I'm director of Shelter Centre. I also founded an IT NGO, AidWorld. I'd like to progress this conversation about improving the communication between decision makers and assessment capacities. I've been part of these sorts of events since the Symposium for Humanitarian Information Exchange started up. And it's very rare we get the decision makers in the same room as the people who can do the assessment. It doesn't end up in a productive relationship, this sort of service orientation and flexibility. There's huge opportunity. This is in part because of the structure of the way our business is put together, but the only way that we'll be able to deal with and also have additional advocates for the value of what you're doing is to engage your clients more productively in conversations. There's this idea of being demand-led. I'm just wondering how we might improve those conversations. So at a sectoral level, but also at higher levels, that the strategic importance of what you can study, what you can find information about, how we can stop the tail wagging the dog. That would be very interesting to explore. I wonder if Lars Peter, you've got any comments or suggestions as to how we can improve this conversation between the users of your data, the people who make those decisions. One conclusion on your map action point is that no one has sat down and mapped what decisions get made in an operation yet. And they're pretty similar in terms of what happens and in what order. I mean, they're different by sectors, but they're pretty similar. And it would be lovely if we could just unpack that a little bit, because we need to understand as decision makers, we need to understand ourselves and our decisions far better than we do. We don't know what decisions we're making.
I very much agree with that. There has been some work done on studying which decisions are made. Helen Campbell, for example, has done quite a lot of work on that. So we do have some stuff on it. I spoke to a researcher who went to Ebola to study the humanitarian sector, and one of the things he came back and said, that, you know, the hardest thing is to get a humanitarian to admit that he or she makes a decision. Right? And I think, you know, I think we have a tendency to want to hide either behind our experience, you know, it's big, or hide behind the data, or the data told me to do this, so I don't have, you know, I had no choice. That's not what it's like. You know, you have to make decisions. That there's no way around that. I don't think that'll change before we change the incentive structure. Right now, there's not a lot of incentives for people to actually be more transparent about how they make decisions. But if we want to talk about accountability, that's probably one of the most important things to crack. I think part of it is, I think there's carrot and stick. I think carrot is delivering the best possible information products to people so they actually want to use them. And the stick is the donors changing their policies, upping the demands on how you have to document, which is how you make the decisions. And that should go for donors themselves as well, by the way.
I want to go back to the bad news part, because I feel like, okay, controversial views, etc., but that they still come together is a nice world, but probably not the world we're living in. Because what I struggle with is like operation after operation, you see the turf fighting potential of these assessments, and you see within the same UN organization a desire to make one assessment that is then available for the clusters, and then the cluster lead from the same organization doesn't really use that assessment because he wants to do his own assessment because that looks better, etc. So I have a feeling that this is still very prominent. What's your view on how we can carrot and stick that away?
Yeah, I think it's back to I think it's back to carrot and stick. I think on one side, some donors beginning to change their guidelines so that you don't have to do your own field assessment, but you can actually rely on other people's assessment. That's allowed. You know, that's great, because then maybe we will get more synergy. And secondly, you know, if we can't do something which is good enough for others to base their operations on it, or base their initial decision making on it, then, I mean, you can choose to say two things. Either he's an idiot and he just wants to do his own thing, or you're not good enough. And the truth is probably somewhere in between. You know, the key for me is that we have to get used to investing more in this. We underinvest in assessment. We probably spend more money figuring out how it went wrong after the fact than looking at getting it right up front. Right? But it's really, we can see it again and again. And I know I sound so sure when I say these things, but when I was in Pakistan in 2010 as the ONDAC team leader, I was told to do the world's best assessment, right? We were 11 people on the team. After 24 hours, everybody else was out coordinating. Right? If we don't have ring-fenced analytical capacity, people will coordinate and respond because we have to. I'd make the same decision today. Right? So it's about having ring-fenced analytical capacity so we have enough brains around the table. And there I think the current Haiti operation is quite positive, actually. And it's about having products that are good enough for people to actually use them. And we're not quite there yet. We're getting there. And then it's about donors putting pressure on the system so that the political powers that be, and we have them in all agencies, right? That they are actually forced to look at the evidence and not just at their own agency interests.
And if I can just add something, I think it's improving in some chronic crisis affected countries, like Afghanistan, South Sudan, Central African Republic, and DR Congo. Now most of us are working with coordinated emergency response programs. So like UNICEF would have the lead in CAR in Congo. ECHO is pushing and is having the lead on it in South Sudan and Afghanistan. So you basically cut the territory into different regions, and if Solidarité is in charge of assessing the needs in, I don't know, in Wardak province in Afghanistan, then if there is a sudden movement of population, then Solidarité would be the one doing multi-sectoral assessments, then providing the raw data and some sort of dashboard to all other actors that everyone can jump into, deliver hygiene kits, blankets, whatever, cash, etc. So I guess it could be seen as a big improvement in the assessment, but again, it's not about situation analysis. It only works in countries when we all understand the basic situation, but we know sudden population displacements are going to happen, and we know why they're going to happen. We just don't know when and how. And actually, it's what you were saying about the tendency to think that it's all about objective analysis of quantitative data, for example, and we call that assessment. For me, that's a good example of some UN agencies and donors pushing for objective assessment. Like in DR Congo and Central African Republic, it's striking to see that the only thing that you get out of these is a dashboard with quantitative data analysis, and that's all you get. Like there's no qualitative, no thinking, no sense making out of it. It's like...
I mean, let's face it, why are we talking about this? Right? Why have assessment been high on the policy agenda for the past 5-6 years? Because the donors basically don't trust the funding instruments they're getting from the system. Right? There's a breakdown of trust, as I see it, between the main donors and the big agencies, and that came out. There was 27 of the donors in 2009 sent a letter to the emergency relief coordinator saying, get your act together, we need to have better assessments. Right? Now you can't replace that lack of trust with a dashboard or with a methodology. We have to find a way of getting to trust each other again, because the situations we operate in are so dynamic that we'll never be able to measure them precisely. Right? And so if we don't have the trust, we're not going to move forward. And we'll see when that comes.
Yeah.
I would maybe want to ask questions still to you, Nathalie and Nita, in terms of within your organization, what is kind of the process you have in place to look at like the decisions you have to make, and what do you think about the remark Lars Peter made that there should be maybe more resources on analyzing all the data than on maybe let's say the techie guys getting the data?
Internationale, to respond to this challenge, because it's one really, I share the statement, and we try to reinforce monitoring and evaluation unit, and to within the delegation of Terre des Hommes on the field, and even to create quality and accountability department within the delegation, the biggest one, to rely on people with the qualification. There are national staff, and but they have a high level of qualification, and they are able to make TOR for situation analysis or for evaluation. They are able to analyze data. They are able to make the follow-up of consultants making situation analysis or capitalization, or I don't know. They are able to diffuse information and to put it in discussion with the main partners of the project. So we tried this in Mali, and well, it's they have just 1 year and a half of existence, so it's a bit early to really to have a definitive opinion on this. On the role of this type of department, but the first evaluation we've made with an external evaluator was really positive, and mainly on this question of strategic thinking, analysis, and a more broader view of the project, more integrative also approach of the project, working with partners, etc. Well, the things and more training and for all the staff in our delegation on ICT data management, but also methodology, and trying to put this together. Well,
I just want to have
We have to,
sorry, I was
Yeah.
we have to close?
too
Or-
long.
You mean? What?
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe a few more words, but it's
Okay.
half already. Like, and because the lightning talks start kind of immediately after, so maybe if you just could
Ah, okay.
round up.
Yeah.
then-
Okay, sure. Then, how to summarize this? I won't, I guess, try to put it all together. But I think we went through several layers from the operational, tactical, strategic, and we looked at several angles at the problem that we posed ourselves at the beginning of the session. So yeah, let's see if we can conclude or continue the discussion also later on in, here at the conference, but also afterwards. I think this is definitely a field that conferences should address more, I think, to look at the sense making and the decision making part. So that will be an interesting item to put on the agenda, maybe of new conferences to come and new research agendas. And then look at the panel if they maybe want to say some final closing remarks.
Don't forget the bad news, but focus on the good news.
And thanks a lot to